Pieczenik here in just a minute. Former head of psychological operations, State Department, obviously worked in other agencies and been involved in regime change. Let's play that clip from Peter Ford, former British ambassador to Syria, because he's got an incontrovertible point here. Just on its face, it's true. The jihadis love false flags. How are we going to keep them from doing it, whether this was real or not? Here it is.
And based on previous experience, including Iraq, we can see that we cannot take at face value what the so-called intelligence experts tell us, not when they have an agenda. But come back to the main point, that it's not going to end here, and we are likely, Britain, to be dragged into it, because Trump has just given the jihadis 1,000 reasons to stage fake flag operations, seeing how successful and how easy it is with a gullible media to provoke the West into intemperate reactions. They will very likely stage an operation similar to what they did, and this was documented by the United Nations in August last year. They mounted a chlorine gas attack on civilians, and they tried to make it look like it was a regime operation. This, mark my words, you're hearing it here, and it will happen, and we'll get all the warmongers coming to tell us that Assad is defying us and we must go in more heavily into Syria. This will be fake flag.
Fake flag. That's a great way to explain false flags to folks. So Dr. Steve Pieczenik, Pieczenik.com, best-selling author, also with Tom Clancy and more, joins us, medical doctor, psychiatrist, and I won't go over his whole bio. From your angle on Friday, from all my research, is what the president currently believes. So you're spot on. You tie that into Skousen believing he was misled. I know you've learned more now over the weekend. That's why you wanted to come on, so we're honored to have you on. Dr. Steve Pieczenik, what is the latest information you have?
What I'm concerned about, and this is a warning to our generals, McMaster, Mathis, and others who think that they can do a regime change in Syria. Number one, that will not be possible. Not with the military, not with all the forces you have, and not with the quality of the soldiers that we have or the generals. Let me be very blunt. Of all the people I know, I have been probably the only one who's been interrogated by Bashar Assad for hours, at the same time worked against Hafiz Assad, and at the same time had a clear understanding of how strong the Bashar Assad family is and how entrenched they will be. So any notion of a regime change through force is both absurd and criminal. If it occurs, there will be no reason whatsoever, including chemical weapons or any other cause belli that will be espoused by either the intelligence community or the president. But the presence of a huge amount of Marines and special forces and thousands of regular soldiers means that we are prepositioning to go in for a war, maybe against ISIS. But remember, ISIS and Al-Qaeda was created by us, by the CIA, by our military intelligence. So to say that we're going to attack a terrorist group which we created means we're attacking ourselves. The same issues right here in Syria. The issue of Syria and Bashar Assad has no national security interest whatsoever to America. What Bashar Assad has done to his people remains to his people. The Russians have handled it. Hezbollah has been involved. Turkey has been involved. The Israelis have been involved. But let me tell you several things. Number one, we have not won a war, including World War II. Let me make it very clear to McMaster, who's talking about dereliction of duty. This will be an incredible dereliction of duty if we go into war, either in Iraq or we can go into Syria. Why? Because McMaster knows very well we are not capable of executing an effective strike. We have never won a war. Even World War II was primarily won in 1942 and 43 by the Russians at Stalingrad. I teach that at Fort McNair. I have told every general, we have lost Vietnam, we lost Korea, we lost Iraq, we lost Afghanistan, so on and so forth. McMaster will come forth and be tried for criminal activity, as will Mathis, because there is no reason to put our men and women in harm's way for oil pipelines or whatever nonsense that this military-industrial complex thinks that we need to do in order to get into the Middle East. We have no interest in the Middle East. If anything, the PSYOPs that was created with President Xi Jinping from China was an excellent PSYOPs. It means we're drawing to the Asia Peninsula, that's fine. We pre-positioned for North Korea, but it does not mean we go either into North Korea or China or Syria. There is no cause for war on either flank. My concern is that, again, we're going through the nonsense of the neocons. I think that David Knight had made a point yesterday. My point was simply that the PSYOPs that was done at Trump's hotel was very effective. But if this goes any step further, this is a warning to our generals, to our president, and to anyone involved. Once again, we will react quite vociferously and strongly. This is grounds for all types of legal action against the president and a voting that will create a desertion.
Okay, but let me stop you. Let me stop you, Dr. Pieczenik, because we go from Friday, you saying, I get the PSYOP. Right. You can't prove either way where the attack came from. The jets did come from there. There are chemicals in the base. From the president's perspective, because I've learned stuff over the weekend, it's dead on what you said. The president's like, we have an agreement going back 4 years with the Russians and Assad to start moving out once we defeat Al-Qaeda and ISIS. We can't say one way or the other. They didn't get the chemicals out of there. We have the intelligence. So we're going to blow them up in place, which I still have questions about what are they going to do if they actually hit them. Thank God the Russians pulled them out. And then Trump is saying, no, we're not doing no-flies. No, we're not taking Assad out. You saw Spicer come out today and say everything that was in our article this morning. He says it word for word 1 hour ago because it came from the president. And the president's like, no, but I'm not going to let anybody use these chemicals. I'm going to let people know if you do use them, I'm coming after you. And it's a message, and there's a deal in place. And then folks ask the president, well, why are the troops getting massed? And he goes, I can't talk about it. Now, this is word for word from the president. And then you see McMaster and others on Fox News constantly, like he's the new press secretary, saying different things than what Trump and Spicer's saying. And Spicer is taking notes directly from the president and putting them out on it. Taking that intel, what do you make of that? And then expanding on it. I guess you've got some really good sources, obviously, as well, because you're word for word saying what we're getting.
Let me tell you this. I understand what you're saying. I understand what Roger may be saying. What I'm telling you is that I know for a fact the people I know in the military are increasing their force structures to the degree that there is no strategy whatsoever. In effect, I wrote this to my people in the intelligence community and elsewhere. If you have no strategy and regime change is not a strategy, do not go into war.
So why is McMaster saying things different than the president and his press secretary?
Because it's an old technique. You have one person saying one thing, putting pressure on, then you have the president denying it. What you're doing is trying to confuse the public media, or otherwise said, you're trying to create a kind of disturbance for Assad, who's very smart. He's much smarter than our own people. He's an ophthalmologist. He's board certified. He's been in power for over 30 years. He understands what the reality is. But for the American public, which is being told two different things at the same time, you have to go back to the Bush administration, which said we're not going into war. You have to go back to the Obama administration, the Clinton administration. Everyone said
so. It's the very same neocon crap. So what does the president need to do?
The president needs to understand that if he goes to war, that's his problem, and we will have a major blowback domestically. The American people do not want to have a war. We do not want to send our kids into battle. Our military is not prepared for this kind of war. I've been in the Syrian desert during the summer. It's unbearable. It is huge. It is the homes and Hamas is filled with Sunnis. Our generals have no idea what they're doing. And in fact, if this is about pipeline wars or it's about the military-industrial complex, which it comes back again and again because we have no national security interest in Syria, Iraq, or Iran.
Okay, so how did you change since Friday where you thought good stroke of genius? You said PSYOP Friday, a successful PSYOP. Now you're saying you're really concerned.
Well, because going from one PSYOP to China was the appropriate thing to do. But once I hear and I understand that there are more forces in Syria over the weekend, there was artillery placed in there. And in fact, they are creating in the White House what we call a dichotomy or two messages. That's totally different from what happened on Friday. Friday, nothing was said. Nothing was said in terms of the PSYOPs. It was elegant, it was effective, and we sent out a fleet, as he said, to the South China Sea. Whether we attack North Korea, I think that's not very bright, but at least we have a presence there. But once we have a statement by McMaster, and at the same time Trump denying it, so you have a purposeful confusion, then I am saying very clearly, do not go to war. We've been through this scenario repeatedly.
Sure. So what are the neocons thinking?
All of these neocons have never served our government. They've never been in war. They have belonged to the military-industrial
So why is McMaster going along with it? He's the national security advisor now, not John McCain.
Because McMaster is going to follow the orders of the president. In short, he may be committing the very sins he wrote about, dereliction of duty. There was dereliction of duty in Vietnam when he wrote about it, and Westmoreland and other generals followed through, knowing fully well we had never had a strategy, we never had an effective tactic, nor were our soldiers prepared. McMaster knows the same issues here. He knows we're not prepared, we're not effective, we have a one-to-one.
Sure. What about the Petraeus connection to McMaster?
Petraeus brought in McMaster and put him back as a lieutenant general because McMaster was basically isolated because of the book he wrote on dereliction of duty. But I'm not a fan of Petraeus, as I've said repeatedly. Petraeus went in, he self-promoted himself. He's never really been other than South. But let me be very clear. With all due respect, including my own father, we did not win World War II. What we did was to defeat the Japanese in order to release 100,000 troops, Russian troops, to go back into fighting for Stalingrad and on the Western Front. By the time we went into Europe and Germany, the Soviets were on the Elbe River. So that has to be made very clear. George Marshall said it.
Well, sure. When it comes to casualties, the Russians lost 20 million people.
In World War II.
Just briefly on China. How do you think the meeting went? What's the info you've got on that? The big task force group going up there by northern China and the South China Sea, by Japan, by the Korean Peninsula. Where do you expect all that to go?
Well, that's a good question. Actually, your assistant, Nico, just gave me an interesting point. First of all, the meeting went very well. What Trump did and McMaster's did was a brilliant PSYOPs operation focusing to Syria and then shifting really to the South China Sea. The real problem now, and this is where the regime change comes in, and this is where America has to watch itself. What's happened now, and Nico informed me that 150,000 Chinese soldiers went on the North Korean-China border. To me, that's very credible, and I'll tell you why. For over 30 years, I was held back on any regime change in North Korea because for me, it wasn't very hard to bring down North Korea. There are many simple ways to do it without going to war. However, one of the things that I had been warned about repeatedly was that China could not tolerate and would not tolerate the ingress of millions of North Koreans into China. That would eventually destabilize China. So what we have going on right now is the potential destabilization of North Korea and China knows that because President Xi Jinping was humiliated, and correctly so. And he has no idea of what Trump can or cannot do, but he does understand that Trump has the willpower to use force. At the same time, we're looking at Syria, where we're building up troops. One could be the distraction from the other, or at the same time, we would have two wars going on at the same time. That's up to our president, and that's up to our generals. I warn them about wars. Taking down regimes does not mean you have to have a war. In the case of China, this has already been quite significant for Trump to have said to Xi Jinping, look, I just launched 59 missiles. I want to make sure you understand that. Xi Jinping understands that, but at the same time, the Chinese have a hold over Jared Kushner and his buildings in 666 Fifth Avenue.
But what were you going to say about Jared Kushner?
Well, I don't know Jared Kushner. I've seen the best of him. He comes out of a family that was involved in real estate. He's involved in real estate. His father was indicted and convicted. The problem is they have some major properties in Manhattan. One in particular, which I know very well, is 666 Fifth Avenue. Billions of dollars have been foreclosed upon on the Kushner family, and they can't refinance that property. All it takes in the business of real estate, and believe me, I know this very well, is for one major property to go under for billions of dollars, and then it starts to be a domino effect. Kushner is a highly vulnerable target for the Chinese, for the Russians, and any foreign individuals, because their family was doing private business with the Chinese. It's the Chinese who came in and told them, we'll take care of you. Now, he can resign if he wants. He can do whatever he wants. Nevertheless, from a counterintelligence point of view, Kushner and many of those civilians there are really prime targets for foreign governments in terms of manipulation and leveraging. And if I were Jared Kushner, I would leave the White House and do the best thing he could, just say to America, thank you very much, and go back to his real estate business. Otherwise, he becomes a liability. And that liability as a civilian, it doesn't matter whether he's a son-in-law or not, becomes a great liability.
Are you getting this from the news or from your sources?
I don't even have to go to my sources. This is typical counterintelligence techniques. What I use is really just simple intelligence, counterintelligence thinking. This is not out-of-the-box thinking. This is not the kind of thing that we had with the PSYOPs at Largo, where I thought really this was quite unusual. In this case, Kushner is a highly valuable target for the Chinese, for the Russians, for the Malaysians, for the Arabs, in the same way that many of the other civilians are in the Republican Party. They know it. I know it. The intelligence community knows that. So I don't need a source for that. It's just that if he were a good American, he doesn't have to serve our country in the military, which none of the neocons have. I don't care whether he's Democrat or Republican. I would resign if I were he, and I would say, look, thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it, and put his efforts on 666 Fifth Avenue.
But to his credit, it is being reported that he didn't go along with it and they pulled out, or is that just a cover story?
That's a cover story. In the business where your father's been convicted and been in jail, and the prosecutor's your own partner, Christie, none of this washes.
So is Trump elevating him to actually protect him and cover him?
Well, you once asked me, why did Trump keep his whole family there? And I simply said, as a psychiatrist or as an American, he needs it for security, his own sense of security. If that's the case, then he has to rethink again why he has his own family around him with so many conflicts of interest. I can't tell him what to do. I can simply say that it's time for him to focus on the infrastructure, stay away from the wars, decrease the size of our government.
Absolutely. Dr. Pieczenik, powerful. David Knight's coming in.